What's going on, Reef Builders? I'm Jake Adams. Welcome back to another video from the Reef Builder Studio. And today I want to talk about controllable return pumps specifically. Not the power heads in your tank, but the kind of pumps, especially nowadays, that are DC powered and have some kind of controller in line between the power supply and the pump itself. Now, for multiple generations, the freshwater and saltwater aquarium hobby got by with single speed pumps. I'm talking about AC pumps that you plugged in, and whatever power you got out of them, that's the power that you got. If you wanted to change the power at all, or the outflow at all, you basically had to put a ball valve after your pump. You know, it's not really like fine grained control of the water flow coming out of your pump and going into your aquarium. And I mean, in all honesty, there was definitely a lot of us who were puzzled as to how we were going to leverage these newfangled features on DC controllable water pumps. You know, because at first it seemed a little bit like extra unnecessary work, because your typical AC pump plugged into the wall, no problem. As long as it runs, it runs. But then a DC pump, you had a power supply, you had a controller, and you know, the user was kind of basically, the onus was on them to figure out how to use these features. And I would say it's been about 10 years since I think Reef Life Support Systems really popularized the DC controllable water pump. And over that time, a number of features have become critical to the point where if I have to use a single speed return pump, I'm really thinking twice about it. And now that I look around the studio, I'm like, I don't think any of these return pumps here are a single speed, and I really make use of a lot of the great features. So definitely one of the biggest things to know about today's DC controllable pumps is almost all of them are going to be powered by what's called a sine wave signal, right? So instead of pulsing the power like that, you know, just really just jolting the motor, even if it's 60 times per second, you know, like that, it's which creates a lot of noise. The new sine wave signal now is just more like of a smooth ramp up and down, even though it's 60 times per second. That, you know, basically it's like pushing a wheel. You know, it's pushing the wheel and keeping that momentum going instead of like hitting a wheel, if that makes any sense. So the sine wave signal, first of all, it's magical how much it quiets down the water flow coming from your return pump. So this particular tank, for example, we're going to use this tank for example. This tank is using a Dalu Australia great white return pump, and the protein skimmer itself uses the same type of pump but with a needle wheel and a protein skimmer body. So we're going to talk about the controllable features both for the return pump and for the protein skimmer. So I've always got my little cheat sheet here. So first of all, normally when you had like an AC pump that was just driving all the water flow back into the tank, one speed and that's it. But now with controllable pumps, you can really fine tune the water flow. And this is really important because nowadays you cannot get a pass putting an aquarium in like a living room or an entertainment room or anywhere that people are gonna spend time if you have an overflow with lots of gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. And most how-tos and DIYs and explanations of how the continuous siphon overflow works only makes mention of controlling the drain water that's going down into your system, because you want to throttle it back just enough so it's never pulling down all that water. So it's a continuous siphon all the way down to the tank. So most of you probably already know to use your gate valve or diaphragm valve to adjust that water flow to be in balance with how much water is going through your tank. But if you're driving a ton of water to your tank, you might overwhelm your continuous siphon overflow. So this is why I like to prefer to play a more delicate dance between the return flow coming from the water pump and the continuous siphon overflow that is draining water down to your sump. Let's take a breath. Hope you guys are still with me, because now we're about to really dive into the features that really help to put controllable DC water pumps in another league. So one thing that I really prioritize for all of my aquariums is always oversize the water pump, because just like everything else, your car, your aquarium lights, your water heater, your furnace for your house, I mean everything, they are all designed to be basically at the edge of their capacity when they're running at 100%, when they're running full bore or as much as they can. And there's a safety margin built in there so that you don't wear it out. But if you get an oversized pump for your aquarium and you throttle it back a lot, two things will happen. One, you're gonna have a much quieter water pump, much quieter operation. You're gonna put a lot less wear and tear, I think it's number 2, a lot less wear and tear on your bearings, because those are designed to take the stresses of running at 100% all the time, because that's what people are used to. So if you throttle it back, you're really extending the life of your device. And third, this is really important, especially in a reef aquarium environment, your pump is going to run a lot cooler, because if it's running hot, it is going to precipitate calcium carbonate right around that impeller. This is the lime buildup that happens inside your pump because of that localized heat, because people are taking small pumps and running them at 150%. Not that you can do that, but you get my point. So I did a video on the Deltec eFlow a long time ago, well over a year ago, and I'm running that thing less than a third of its output. And so therefore it stays really cool, and there was almost zero lime buildup for like 600 gallons of total system volume. So, for example, I am using the Dalua Great White, I think it's called the 3000. So it's 40 watts, 3,000 liters of water per hour. And that translates to a maximum of 800 gallons per hour. But I have it running at 7 out of 20 flow speeds. So every increment is 5%. So I'm running it at 35%, right? So that would be a nominal outflow of, let's just call it about 300 gallons. But you saw a couple of videos ago, I put the Clover nozzle on it. So let's just go ahead and shave off, another 20% or so. So we're gonna go now to about 240 gallons per hour. So the Great White 3000 with its controllable settings, I have it running at number 7, which is 35%, and that's right around 240 gallons per hour, and that's about a 3x turnover. I know what you guys are gonna say now. There's a lot of people who are really stuck on having crazy turnover through the aquarium. I don't play that game. My maximum has always been 4x per hour, because 4x per hour is 100 times per day, and no one can convince me, unless you have really dirty fish, that you're gonna get much more filtration from your sump or your skimmer or your filter socks running at 200 times per turnover per day versus 100 times turnover per day. So a couple things about the Dalua Great White that I really like. It's got that sine wave control. It has those 20 speed settings I was telling you about. It's part of kind of one of the newer classes. It's hard to know when these generations begin and end, but it's one of the newer generations of the DC pumps that that technology's been available to aquarists for about 10 years now. So it's definitely that new breed with a sine wave control. It's got 3 feed modes, at 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then off. What else did it have? Oh, it also has 3 interesting modes that I really haven't dabbled into very much. So mode number 1 is just a regular standard continuous mode. Mode number 2 is a fast pulsing mode, which would be really interesting in a closed loop setting, which basically pulses the water and probably can create a wave. In this aquarium, because I have the Clover nozzle on here, it would probably do a lot of splashing. And then the third mode is a slower ramp up and down of intensity. I think those 3 modes would take a little bit more deliberate installation and experimentation to really get them to work to the best of their ability. But I also like that the controller is detachable, and it has basically capacitive or touch sensitive buttons. So I'm touching it with my wet hands all the freaking time. So as you've seen, the synergy between the DeLua Great White Pump, the Clover nozzle, and the continuous siphon overflow really is a triumvirate of 3 different things working together. We're getting about 3 times turnover of just this aquarium. But I also mentioned that the DeLua Great White DC model now uses basically the same pump, the same technology. So it's got that sine wave control, so it's really nice and quiet. It has different modes on it, so it has a 10, 20, and 30-minute timer. Man, I'll tell you what, there is a lot of controllable DC protein skimmers on the market today, and not enough of them have a basic built-in feeding mode. That's just kind of egregious in my mind. So the DeLua Great White Skimmer DC has those 3 feeding modes. It has those same 20 increments at 5%, and I'm running it at about 15% power. Once again, I don't want to run it full bore. And 2, by varying the speed of the pump and the water level within the skimmer body, you can adjust for wet skimming or dry skimming. So wet skimming is when you're basically doing like a concentrated, diluted water change, and that's a little bit more for the expert because there's a risk of just overflowing or filling up your cup too fast. But you have that option because you can control the outflow, you can control the air going into the skimmer, and you can control the speed of the pump. So I like to run mine about 15, which is 75% capacity, because it gives me a little bit of room. Like, say for example, if I'm doing some cleaning in the aquarium and there's a little bit of futz in the water, just for a couple hours, I'll go and like turn it up a couple notches just to get it to skim out a little bit more of that funk. And I guess there's not really any occasions for me to turn it down, but if you were to have an occasion where the protein skimmer was overflowing because you added something in your tank, maybe you had some residue or something on your hands for one reason or another, you'd be able to turn that down a couple notches so the protein skimmer can skim out whatever's agitating it without turning your skimmer completely off. So I think I've said everything I wanted to say. I really want to encourage people to get pumps a little bit bigger than you think you're going to need, because when you dial it back, you are really preserving your pump, reducing calcification, and you're just going to end up with really, really quiet operation. So I'm a big fan of the DeLua Australia Great White DC Pump and the Great White DC Protein Skimmer. They are the heart of filtration for this particular tank. They're really great match, and they go up to some larger sizes. I'm not super familiar with the larger sizes, but the DC-12 Protein Skimmer and the DC-30 or DC-3000 water pump is what's running on this aquarium. So I hope you've enjoyed this primer about the DeLua's filtration equipment, but more so telling you about why it matters to have a controllable pump and how to make the most of those. So if you have any questions about pump selection, tank turnover, flow rates through and within your aquarium, go ahead and pop those down in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to subscribe, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Later, guys.